You can be what you wanna be if you do what you gotta do. It all happens at Hilary's house, where all you gotta be is you. Hey everyone, and welcome to Hilary's house, the Bahamian version. I'm very grateful for your patience with this episode. I'm really excited to share this particular conversation. In the last episode, Biba and I talked about traveling, and Biba talked about how traveling changed her life, saved her life, led her to see the world in a very different way than she had before, particularly in terms of understanding the differences between how people are in their countries of origin as opposed to how they are in this particular country or in another country. And I think that's a really beautiful precursor to this conversation, which is with my really good friend Peri Redwood. And we are talking about the experience of living in other countries. And in particular, we're talking about the experience of living in each other's countries of origin and what that means. And we also talk a lot about what is home? How do you define home? How do you decide, is it this place, or it's actually all the places? And how does one integrate oneself and allow oneself to own all of who a person is? And so I'm really excited about this particular conversation. One of the things that's mentioned in this episode is the Moonflower Room. And the Moonflower Room is a project that I did with the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. And I'm going to put information about the Moonflower Room in the comments, including how to get this particular book. But I wanted to open up this conversation, this episode, with a poem from it, which has been a very important poem and says more in 3 or 4 pages than I could ever say in days of sitting here and talking. And this poem is called Networks. Blessed be the wounded, they will only heal. Blessed be the broken, they will only mend. Blessed be the fatigued, they will only awaken. Blessed be the bound, they will only release. Blessed be the colonized, that is we. Jesus turned fishermen into fishers of men, missions accomplished, churches of divine deliverance, redeem, Holy Spirit, Pentecostal, Jehovah God revivals, evangelizing Sundays, salvific, thick with pork, peas and rice, plant and pep rallies, charming. Snakes? Eve? Please. Hey, network. From what roots this mangrove grows. Wet, warm wombs securing freshly tattered nets, unraveling lifted walls once protected the network. 6 months petrified in limestone, surrounded by sharks feeding salty interactions, stealing identities with Irene's galvanizing breath-beating steel. On the friends, family, and lovers plan, coiling roots echo the curves of voluptuous women painted on Wolf Road storefronts. But anyway, the network. The path is rarely apparent in the arteries of sea-logged keys blocked by cultural colonial cholesterol. But anyway, the network. Makeshift avenues, shapeshift yards, trails blaze bushes just 'cause the sunshine, private porches public as bathroom, beach bars sacred, mains maintained the goombay, banging, singing. We don't need slave food marching down streets singing, we shall overcome, we shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Playing lives of sister, brother, auntie, cousin like a game of Fox Hill dominoes. And anyway, the network pastor still preaching in Parliament on Monday morning. Don't let looks fool you. But anyway, the network. Enigmas contradict themselves stiff. Colonial governments occupy militiamen's skin, defining roots of religious hierarchies harassment. Race harass. Gender harass. Class harass. Her ass. Still, sinuous seagrasses dance the tide, mirroring JUNKANOO, rushing, feigning surrender, failing to subside, conch, slip, slide, slime, slicking down. The rules? Ignore the laws of physics. Watches keep rhythms rather than hours. Space? Undivided. Matter created, the matter's destroyed. I've forgotten what I know, so the net must wake. Invisible are the holes, blessing colonizers, rich, sick, they ain't get control. In nets with holes. Welcome to Hilary's house. Have a great day.
Hey,
Hey,
how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm well, feeling kind of optimistic right now, not allowing COVID to make me think of like limitation, but more open to like what the world and the landscape is going to look like post the experience. Trying to like live in that space of
Yeah.
potential. So that's keeping me like optimistic and in good spirits and yeah, just open. Oh, you look
Good.
so good.
Thank you. I was thinking the same thing about you. I chose this special double tail mermaid background just for you.
I love it.
It was actually part of a sign on a conjure shop in New Orleans.
Good to see you.
It's so good to see you too. You have many distinctions in my life, but one of the distinctions within the context of Hilary's house is that you are the only person who attended the real Moonflower room and made your house Hilary's house.
I'm honored. I'm honored.
I'm honored.
That's fantastic.
I think it's fantastic, and I'm so grateful because I love having you in my presence. You have taken on a new identity, and this is my first time of getting to call you Peri, and so I was wondering if you would tell me about that.
It's short for periwinkle. I've had a lot of difficulty throughout my life, I think, with the idea of naming and identity and how I refer to myself. And I actually have a long history, I realize, of name changing. I think some people think it's like a little deceptive, but it's not intended to be that way. For me, it's been like an exercise in kind of trying to find my true self, or like externalizing to the world what I feel inside, you know, like trying to make a connection between those spaces. And it's also kind of like my relationship with names is like a bit strange because I was never actually called my first name because my dad had the same name. And so I was called by my second name. My parents actually never called me that name. And the name I was known by wasn't actually my legal name anyway. And so that starts out like an already kind of complicated relationship.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
So I didn't have any attachment to some like set name from the get-go.
Yeah.
And I think that allowed me like space to think of it as a more playful exercise of naming. And, you know, when I got into a relationship that I'm still in, almost 10 years now, which is wild, I was given a lot of nicknames. And my partner the first one was Dandelion, because he thought I was just like, I'd blow in the breeze. I was really free spirited and kind of like open to change. And the next was Rose Petal, this kind of idea of being like really tough, but also fragile, depending on which way you like tore me or like cut, like, you know, the way the tension was applied, and beautiful, but kind of only a part of. And so like there were these like, you know, like loving kind of nicknames for me. But maybe about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, I talked a lot about a periwinkle bush in my yard. I started doing work kind of mourning my grandmother. She died in 2001, but it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized how significant my relationship with her was, and how much she was there for me. And that started to evolve as I started to look at the kind of trauma I grew up in and the kind of chaotic environment in my immediate household, as well as kind of positioning myself culturally. So when I was investigating her, I started to use a lot of fruit trees to like my memories had a lot to do with food preparation. Like she'd make sauce a lot, or she'd always like in the mornings do like half a grapefruit. She used a lot of medicinal herbs and stuff, and she always had like dill trees in the yard and passion flower and a few other things that I remember like going like if my stomach was hurting, she'd like go pick some dill and bring it in. She'd make a tea and anyway, so I was thinking about like plants and like the mango tree or the ackee tree in her yard, and I started creating these memory books. It had a lot to do with plants and fruits and then I thought of my childhood home, and there was this periwinkle bush that was in my front yard. And when I was a teenager, I lived with my dad. My parents were divorced, and my dad's a fisherman. And so he was kind of absent for the majority of the year, really. Like he was a lobster fisherman, so he'd be gone for like a month or two at a time for several trips out of the year. And I was brought up by largely my grandmother until she fell ill. And the yard was not taken care of. It was kind of like a representation of me. And prior to moving to New York, I read a tree grows in Brooklyn, like completely separate from this.
So you're in New York now, correct?
I'm in New York now. I'm in Brooklyn now.
Where did you move from?
Nassau, Bahamas. And I moved here about 9 years ago. 9 years ago next month.
Okay.
You know, it's just funny that I ended up living not actually far, like that book was written in Williamsburg, which is just like a couple of miles from where I live now in Bushwick. And it was the first protagonist that I identified with so much, was this kind of little girl who was coming of age and in poverty and trying to like get out of like this poor situation through like education, self-knowledge and exploration. And you have the metaphor of the life tree growing through this crack in like a quote unquote wasteland. And in my yard, like nothing was taken care of, kind of like how I felt I was, like not really taken care of. We had dogs, otherwise known as pot cakes, and they dug up everything. It was just dirt, like it was a sand pit, like our whole yard was a sand pit. And except for this one periwinkle bush that like lived through the entirety of like my childhood, it like would not die. And in fact, it grew, it like became really unruly and large and in flower. And I had a lot of memories of that. And there's also this other storyline, which is that I used to have these nightmares, this recurring nightmare of leaving my house. And I would go onto my porch and there was always a person, which I like through therapy have like named my shadow self, who stood on the walkway to the street from my front door. And it was right where this periwinkle bush was. And when I would walk towards the street, it would shoot me. And I would either wake up or I'd die. And that's how the dream would play out every time. I've not had that dream in quite a while. I've done a lot of work to like move past it. But as I identified this kind of figure as a version of myself preventing me from kind of entering into the world, the periwinkle started to take on, not only was this like life-giving tree that represented me, but it also represented these like dark parts of me. And it started to become like this fully integrated kind of image that I started to take on of myself. And so, yeah, the periwinkle, you know, it's used in cancer treatment for like children, and I liked the idea of it like doing childhood healing. And so I just like felt like, you know what, this feels right. Like my partner started calling me Periwinkle. And I was like, this feels right. Like I felt home, you know, when I was called it. And I started referring to myself as Peri or Periwinkle. And so I took that identity on. I also was attracted to it being not gender specific, like it's kind of just a name, you know, it can kind of fit. You don't really know, if you said, oh, I'm going to be Peri, it could be a boy or girl, a they, it doesn't really matter. And so you like lose those like gender specifications. And it's not as common, you know, it feels like a little more distinctive. I was using it like amongst friends and my partner, and it eventually caught on so much that at work, my boss had to be like, okay, like it's confusing now. Do you want to like go with it? And so even like my work email and my business cards and everything says Peri, which is cool. So I've gone through this like transition into like a new name and a new identity, which aligned really well with this like big shift that happened in my life. So it kind of worked out serendipitously, you know.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you for
So,
sharing that story. That's
you're
great. I
welcome.
love that. Can you talk about what souse is?
I don't know if I could define souse other than it's like a soup.
Probably adequate.
I
A soup
don't.
with like whole pieces of stuff.
Oh
Right,
yeah,
like
totally.
whole animals are in it.
Complete.
The
Yeah.
branch of the herbs. It's not like the leaves get picked off.
No, it's not.
The
It's so
whole
fun.
seeds, the leaves. You just like take all the things and put it into a pot and let it sit there for a while.
I love how you describe that because like I remember making it. I wanted to make boiled fish, but I didn't have the kind of fish I wanted. And so for New Year's, maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I made souse and Johnny cake for friends for like New Year's, trying to like celebrate like post JUNKANOO morning.
Yeah.
Celebration at home, or and so I made it, and I remember my friends thinking like it was so unrefined, like it's because it's just like you said, like it's just like chunks, like these big chunks of onion and just like a big plop of potato,
right, the whole potato
slice just floating around in it like whole things, but it's so elegant in that way, you know what I mean?
It is.
Like it's just
look,
like
it really is. There's nothing like it. I mean, there are other things that are like it, but I completely agree. There is something elegant and soothing and comforting and healing about souse. And not only that, but the experience of pulling the bones and the branches and the everything out of your mouth while you're eating it.
yeah,
To me, that's part of the experience of eating souse.
Yeah, totally. It's like, do I need a fork? Do I need my fingers? Do I need a spoon? Do I need all of them? I don't know.
Yeah, a fork and chopsticks.
Yeah. So, but my grandmother used to make souse a lot. She used to do pork souse, actually. It wasn't a traditional kind of like, it wasn't like sheep tongue. She did chicken too, but she was all about the simple life. Throw it in a pot, let it stew, and kind of like do something else. And so I have like a fond like relationship. There are certain dishes, that I've actually been making a lot. Well, not a lot. I'm over exaggerating. I've been revisiting during COVID that just have nostalgic energy. Like it's almost like the food has like memory,
Yes, look.
And
I could
like
write a book about that.
I'm sure you could. But it's nice to revisit those foods. And
what's your favorite one that you've revisited?
I make tuna and grits a good amount because that's like a staple that I like. I just got some corned beef to make fire engine. Corned beef and white rice, which isn't that complicated. But growing up, I was really affected by nature in that the economics of fishing was very dependent upon how well the weather was, and we would have good summers and we would have bad summers. And my dad is not the most financially, he's been able to do me well when I was younger, but savings isn't really a thing. And so when seasons were poor, we were poor. And we fire engine. We had a fire engine for like a whole summer, like every day. Like it's just like corned beef and white rice. Like that's what we ate. So it was kind of like a survival food, and it's there's trauma kind of in the food as well. But I'm more willing to like engage that and kind of reclaim it as something of an experience that's given me strength.
That's a very the narrative of soul food, right?
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, I actually didn't think of it that way. Yeah. Oh, macaroni. Well, baked macaroni. I got it.
Okay, so you need to describe for the Americans in the audience, when they hear macaroni, they're not going to be thinking about Bahamian macaroni or like Caribbean macaroni, because it's. And we know that. Okay, so we know also every country and every island has its own version. But talk about generally what is Bahamian macaroni.
Bahamian macaroni, it has to have shape. Like it's got to be.
It's like a block.
Yeah, it's got to be a block. It's got to be like you could if it's a little chilly, you could like build a house out of it.
Yeah, it's solid.
Yeah, it's solid. It's not like a saucy kind of thing. It's like really starch heavy. It's got to have a lot of like bell peppers or sweet pepper, is what I grew up calling it. A lot of onion and a lot of hot pepper. And it's got to have what we also were used to call government cheese,
Yes.
which is, I guess, a version of cheddar, though it was nothing like it, really.
It's like probably a cross, like an American understanding might be a cross between Kraft singles and really cheap cheddar cheese.
Yeah, it just came like from the butcher, like wrapped in the saran wrap, and it was high in oil. Yeah, like it had to be made with that. That's actually something I've been struggling with, is that using cheddar or like other variations of cheese I've found doesn't quite get the exact flavor profile that I want. Yeah, it's just got to be dense. You know, for me, it's got to be dense. It's got to be cooked and baked, so it has like a nice, good crust on the top. So you could be scooped out as like a block. Yeah, once it has pepper and fat and starch, because a good Bahamian meal for me is starch on starch on starch. It's just got to be delicious. But also the macaroni is delicious.
What's exciting for you right now?
Funnily, I was talking to someone today about this. Stability has become exciting for me.
Yeah.
I am the most stable mentally, emotionally, financially right now than I've ever been in my life. Everything has been about like balance, right? Like, I don't want to call it self-sufficiency because I'm not doing it alone. And like, I have a certain level of autonomy and connectivity that kind of, I feel like, is healthy in providing this flow of energy that's allowing me to thrive a bit more. And I used to rebel a lot against these feelings. It was hard for me to think of to do with money, and that's something that you actually helped me with. I still think about like a conversation you had on my couch, and you were saying,
I remember that conversation.
you're like, think of money as like a transference of energy, and that helped me. Like, that conversation really helped me to begin to reconstruct my relationship to something that I thought was like capitalist and representative of something that was just like not positive in the world, and but a way to like integrate, because I could have all the ideals I want in my head, but if they're keeping me away from being connected to people, then are they really working in my favor? You know? So it was a journey to embrace that I deserve to be paid a decent salary, that I deserve to feel like I take up space, and to not be overly indulgent with self-pity, really. I feel like I used to have so much self-pity. I just thought that if I lived the life I live today, where I was married and had a cute apartment and worked at the same job for years, and which is how what my life is today, that I'd be a square. I'd just be a boring old square, a part of the problem. Oh, I'm just a heteronormative piece of whatever. And the reality is so different from that kind of narrative that I created in my head. And I knew why I was there. I'm not being judgmental. I'm not being overly critical of my younger self. Like, I think I needed to experience and think those things to like process my own trauma around the conditions I grew up in, but I don't hold them today. The adventure for me today is in kind of restructuring how I think of my savings accounts. And not that I have a lot of money, don't like at all. Like it's like, instead of pinching pennies, I'm more like pinching dimes. I don't make a lot of money, but I'm able to like survive and put some money aside and put money towards things that are self-care related. I only had a massage for the first time the end of last year in my entire life. I'm 33, and it took me 33 years to be able to say I'm willing to spend $50 to go get a massage. It's not even an expensive massage, but just because I was so resistant to thinking that I deserved that I could spend money on such a thing. And so I've been trying to do a lot more internal work on where those blockages are, why I think I don't deserve things, and allowing space to do them, like to take care of myself, to like spend money on buying flowers for myself, to, if I have an interest in something, making a budget for it that's reasonable and indulging in it to a certain degree, whether that's like soap making or a certain kind of baking. Like, today I was making a list of new baking equipment that I'd like to get. and they it seems so mundane, but it's just like, it feels like a whole new adventure. And that's really exciting. I've also been doing a lot of spiritual work, a lot of meditation and connecting with the universe and I'm not necessarily trying to define what the universe means to me or what spirit means. I mean, not means to me, but I don't need to define what it is. You know, I kind of feel like I've hit a wall of like, that's a useless exercise. I don't need to define, who am I to define the universe? Like, you know, like, it's kind of like, how do I build a relationship? But
don't you think that's true of all relationships? If we stop trying to define who or whatever we're trying to be in relationship with and just focused on the part that's about connecting, that we would all feel a lot freer.
Yeah, completely. It's insane how much control I feel like I've needed in the past. And when I say control, I don't, you know, I mean like through definition, right? Like it's a very colonizing way of moving through the world. You know, I have to be able to have knowledge of it and define it and place it somewhere for it to be mine in a conceptual kind of construct. And I've moved through the world doing that. And yeah, relationships, totally. And that's where
that's also the naming thing, right? There's so much power in naming. The power is in, I get to say this is what it's called. I get to tell you that this is who you are, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a powerful thing. And you know, I used to be kind of arrogant with it, right? Like I'd be like, well, I'll decide this for myself. And yeah, it's just a futile exercise, you know? And I think it moves against the acceptance of something being what it is. It's such a limiting exercise. So yeah, I kind of try to just be connected, like you were saying, like with any relationship, which is just so true. Like I really try to keep things as simple as I possibly can. It's easy for me to get in the way of myself. It's just the easiest thing in the world to do. And so I keep it simple. It's like, how can I make this work for me and others? How could I be of service to others through this? Then things kind of work out, you know, and I'm just trying to learn how to do that, like learn how to listen. And that's where I use like tarot or meditation and learn how to look inside to change, which is like what I do with therapy or journaling or conversation. And then how do I help the world heal, like, you know, while I'm helping myself heal. And I feel like the three of those kind of have to always be like working together. And I'm able to find like a balance within that. And that's really kind of radical for me to just think in those terms because they're so flexible, you know, like the specifics can change at any moment, but it allows me to kind of stay stable because the ideals are kind of so flexible. It's no longer about the house or the money or the relationship or the, you know, all of these things that are going to change, because that's the one thing I can always count on is that it's going to change.
What's your favorite tarot card?
You know, oh my, it just popped out, so I have to say it, which is the Tower.
Yes, I love the Tower.
It's funny because it's not the card I think I would have wanted to have gone to. And I have a close second favorite. When I first started delving into the world, I got the Tower a lot. And I got sober a year and some change, not exactly a year and a half ago. And right about a year before I got sober, I was getting the Tower constantly. Like there was this constant desire for like change. But the way I interpreted it was so negative. I was afraid of it. Like I became afraid of my deck. Like I didn't want the Tower, you know? I didn't want the Ten of Swords. I just avoided surrender at all costs, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I developed this kind of fear and this kind of naive, oh no, it's a bad card. It means something bad's gonna happen. I have to watch my back. And when's the change? Oh no. And then I got sober. And then the Tower stopped showing up for me. Interestingly, it stopped for a while. And I've gotten it like once or twice, but I got it a couple of months ago. And my relationship to it was so different. I was so grateful for it and so excited to be like, oh my God, not only is there going to be like some drastic change that I'm ready for, whatever that change is, no matter how violent or devastating it may seem, this is such a space for growth that I can't do myself. You know what I mean? Like I so look at that card, it's like, I can't do this for myself. So the universe is making it happen for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful to not have to have that thing to count on to help me grow when I'm just like bucking up against the wall. And so, yeah, I get really excited when I see the tower now.
Yeah. And what was your close second?
Was the Ten of Swords.
Yeah.
Which is a very similar kind
Yeah.
of, yeah. I mean, there are definitely other cards that have like more optimistic light, but I feel like I like to be beaten in a way. Like I'm hard-headed, you know, I need to be told, you know, it's okay, let go. This didn't work, and that's okay. I also love the Ace of Pentacles, and then part of that is just because the deck I'm currently using has this iguana on it, and it's just like laying in the sun, like hanging out. And it makes me think of home, but it's like this kind of idea of like sunbathing and this lizard that's like getting its energy from the sun and like absorbing all this possibility, but it's just like chilling.
What made you move from Nassau to New York?
It was, I had to live. I felt death where I was, and it was a desperate move. If I didn't move, I would have died physically or spiritually. And so that was the core of what made the move happen.
What was the hardest thing for you moving from the Bahamas to the US?
It's hard to pin down like one thing that was the hardest. I think community, like I mentioned just now about the kind of feeling of death, I was ready, you know, I was ready to move when I did. And I'm blessed that it worked out. But I didn't know anyone. I didn't anticipate moving. It wasn't like a predetermined, like I thought and planned in advance that I was going to move on this date and this is how it's going to look and I have a job. It was the exact opposite. I was like on a trip and I stayed. It was largely out of fear. And a shift occurred where I was able to see my life through a different lens. I don't know what made that particular insight occur at that moment, but I was given the strength to say like, you know, that's not going to pan out well for you if you stay. And making that choice, you know, I felt a lot of relief, but I didn't have work, you know, I didn't have even the legality to like find work. I ended up applying to school and getting funding, and that's how I was able to stay and eventually acquire status. But I didn't have a network and I felt really lonely, and the activities I did to survive were also very isolating. Because I didn't have money, I was really desperate to survive, and the relationships I built were self-serving, transactional. All of the friends, which are like my family, you know, the friends I had in Nassau, I didn't have anymore. I suddenly didn't have this small city, big town that I knew really well, that I could work to my advantage, and people in my life who cared about me that I saw on a regular basis, who understood what the experience of growing up in like a small island developing state is like, and who can kind of like speak to, without ever saying like certain words, can like speak to a certain kind of lived trauma just through a joke or a look or like a way that one takes care of another person, that's both loving and competitive at the same time. It's like a really complicated communication. And it was just a different world. Like, even though I sound the way I do and I speak English and I look like any other hipster white man, I felt so different. And I still struggle with this, less so than I once did, but I struggle a lot with a sense of identity and resentment. You know, I had a lot of resentment towards Americans growing up, and that didn't change after I moved. I was both thankful that I had this opportunity to not be in fear of being a queer to the extent that I was, and being kind of like radical on like a political spectrum. But I felt completely disconnected from the history of the place I lived. And it's taken the better part of the decade, you know, for me to reconnect to a community. It's only in the past couple of years that I feel like I finally have like a group of people around me that feel like home, you know, where I'm repositioning my relationship to home as a historic place like Nassau and as a present, which is in Brooklyn. And a lot of that has been actually bringing Nassau to Brooklyn for me. You know, that started in small kind of totems, like actual objects that I brought with me that gained significance that I still have up in my home. Whether it's like a, androsia and red-based basket, or some cowbells from the Saxons, or a fringe tie made by a friend, or Bahamian art, eating food that reminds me of home, and those kinds of things. But there's also, I had to recreate a sense of safety that felt familiar to me within the vastness of New York. And I used to be really ashamed of being kind of a small town boy. I would rebel against that and be like, no, I'm urban and I want to live in the big city and I got big dreams and I'm going to make it, and all those kind of youthful desires. But I feel really comfortable with just saying that I'm a small town guy who lives in a big city. I've created a neighborhood. I live and work walking distance from one another. I ensure that I know a lot of the neighborhood and I support local places. Most days I go for a walk outside. Even now during COVID, I run into people I know. So it's very small town. Like I feel very much a part of a small town or a big town, small city. And a lot of that construct was me transposing a bit of Nassau like onto my surroundings and the kind of ways that people interact and the kind of relationships that people have, and ignoring a lot of the other components of the city. Because for me, the reason I emigrated, unlike many other Americans, I can't speak for anyone, of course, but New York wasn't an easy access point. I can just drive there, it's no big deal. Or I'm going to go to New York and get some experience and then go do something else. Like this is a career move or anything like that. Like my motivations for moving were based out of fear of persecution and of possibility within like not being able to achieve a sense of authenticity in myself in the environment I was in. And so it was really a survival move. So a lot of my attraction to New York, I like to say, if I wasn't so biggity and like radical and gay and queer and all the shit, and an artist and whatever, if I didn't feel pushed out of Nassau from those things, I would have loved to have stayed. Like that was a big pain to have felt forced out. I felt forced out, and that hurt a lot. And so, because I didn't want to give those things up. There's a lot I didn't want to give up. And so it's just taken time to kind of rebuild it in a way where, this is home. Like I've lived in the same block for the 9 years I've lived here. Like I'm not someone who needs to move to every neighborhood and do every little thing. My goal was to create home.
I love this discussion of pulling from transposing Bahamian culture onto your life and pulling from that in order to relearn how to create home. Because that's something that I feel like I've been doing a lot lately. When I'm like, well, it has to be like here or there, right? And then I'm like, no, because there is still so much a part of the version of myself that I really like. And I think one of the things that it took me a really long time to figure out is that one of the things that I love about Nassau is that not all the time, but enough times, I could be a version of myself there that I haven't been able to be anywhere else that I really liked. And so now, instead of being like, well, where should I be? Should I be there, here? All of these things, remembering that I can access that person. I can still be that person even if I'm not there. And that's, I think, where the growth happens, because that's where like the integration occurs.
I haven't spoken to you in a year or about a year, and I know you made a big move that also felt, though you were planning it, it felt sudden to me. Like the decision to kind of like, you're like, I'm doing it, it's happening, this is it, and you stuck to that. And so I guess I'm curious from this similar lens that I've been speaking. Yeah, how are you dealing with the movement in a larger kind of, because you have a lot of experience of kind of migration. You've been in several places and lived in several places. And like you talk about this version of yourself in Nassau. And I feel like we all have these versions that can thrive in all sorts of different conditions. What is your experience been like, and how is it culminating right now? If we're making sauce and we're in like hour 2, what ingredients are being added right now? Or are there no ingredients, and is it like process?
The last year of my life, it kind of was a sudden decision and it kind of wasn't a sudden decision. In a way, I felt similarly to you that I was in a place where I was kind of transform or die. Something had to change. And ultimately, I had to change. And moving has forced me to change in a lot of ways. But I would say in the last year, I have not so much added ingredients as taken ingredients away. This has been very much been a year of stripping and releasing. I've let go of a lot in this last year, and it hasn't been comfortable. It's been pretty uncomfortable. But similarly to your situation, I'm happier now than I've been in a really long time. And it's not because I have a whole lot of community here, because I don't. Like, I hardly know anyone here. It's been an isolating year, which has caused me to really have to go inward in new ways than I ever have before. And like you said, find that stability and understand that, like you said, stability can be sexy, right? This can feel good. And so now I actually, and my business has been shifting, how I see myself has been shifting. My entire identity has changed. And I really feel like I have stripped myself of any identity that I've ever had before over the last year. To the extent I have been living in a bedroom for the last year with white walls. I have not put anything up on my walls at all, no colors. It's been an aesthetic experience. And to a certain extent, I feel like that's been really necessary. And now I'm starting to feel myself emerge or re-emerge, but in a very extremely different shape and form. And I am feeling much more integrated. So it's very much been a cocoon of a year. It's allowed me to go through this process of who do I want to be? Who do I want to be in my life? Who do I want to be in the world? How do I want to act? What really do I believe? Who do I want to be aligned with? What's really important to me? What are my values? And I've kind of experimented with a lot of that. And one of the things that I have loved about the stay in place order, it has been that kind of experience to get clarity. And I have found things that I was not expecting to get clarity on, things that I was not expecting to emerge, or feelings. I'm just like, wow, where did that come from? Like deep realizations about who I am, what matters to me. At the very beginning, I remember putting something online about what the universe is really asking is, who do you want to be stuck with and where do you want to be stuck? That's, I feel like, to a certain extent, always a question that's loaded for me, because like you said, I've spent so much of my life moving around. That is part of my identity, that I move all over the place all the time. Wasn't always just chosen. I moved around quite a bit when I was growing up. So living in Nassau, that was one of the longest periods of my life that I lived in one place, which is why I feel so connected with it, because there's not really that many places that I had spent so much time for, consecutive years in one place. So yeah, it's definitely been a process of releasing parts of myself. Now I feel like I'm moving into the building stages and I'm excited.
That's awesome. I relate so much to so much of that. It really struck me just now on how you said about letting go. It's really amazing to me at how it's like the most powerful thing we can do is to let go, and how difficult it is.
Yeah. Surrender is hard.
It's just torture.
It's so hard. It's so hard. And it's certainly something that is not remotely validated in American society. We don't do surrender. I mean, this country was built on not surrender, which is why the culture is the way that it is. And so, to surrender certainly doesn't come easily to me, but every time that I do it, it's kind of like, oh, I don't know why I didn't do that before, because life is much better this way.
Completely. It's like we know better, but that's not going to stop the ego fighting its way through. As you were talking just now, I actually thought of a really interesting image. And when you were talking about Nassau and parts of yourself that you liked elsewhere, you know, and how to integrate that, as I was talking about bringing Nassau here. And that works in both ways. I've really also been going through a lot of letting go exercises because there's so many things I didn't like. Like I was so focused on the negative. And as you were describing like American culture, and I thought about Bahamian culture, and the image of the burning of JUNKANOO costumes like the day after, you know, came to my mind. So, you know, after the parade takes place, just for listeners, I guess, the costumes are discarded, though people have spent pretty much all year.
Talk a little bit about JUNKANOO, because you referenced it earlier, and I was like, I'm not going to make this a whole Bahamian cultural lesson, but since you're getting into it.
I mean, it's a festival. It's celebrated twice a year on Boxing Day and on New Year's. I don't want to get into a history lesson either, but so much of, like, it's the quintessential, like, parade or external. There's a lot of culture, you know, but it's one that's on show. It's put on show. It's like, I think when Bahamians feel most authentically able to put their own kind of creation on show for themselves, more than like any other kind of activity. And there's a lot of stuff caught up in it, a lot of emotional, as well as like the history that it comes from.
How I describe it to people is it's kind of like the Bahamian version of Carnival.
Yeah, completely. It's yeah, exactly, to give clarity on what it is. Unlike Carnival, where people are just like purchasing, or it's like a drunken celebration of sorts. Right. Like, not to say that they ain't drunk when they rush in, but it's such a serious matter. It's like
the most serious matter.
It's more important than what your pastor says. It's more important than what the Prime Minister says. JUNKANOO will like define a year.
Right. There are sports in the Bahamas, but it's not like there's professional sporting events like there are in the US, and people go, all of Bahamians' competitive energy gets culturally, as the collective, not to say individuals, but collectively, Bahamian competitive energy gets channeled in to JUNKANOO. And like you said, making these costumes, practicing the music. When I was living at Pop-Up, across the, you know, there's that little street, that little side street, and Mr. Curry JUNKANOO shack is right there. They would be practicing every night, you know, November, December, I'd be listening to like JUNKANOO practice at the shack.
Like you just said it, like if I had to think of like a thing to like JUNKANOO practice at the shack. Yeah, it's just a lot of energy, you know, a lot of people put themselves into it, you know, it's involved. But yet, you know, the parade happens and the costume's on the side of the street, you know, and no one's keeping it, or it's not a precious object.
Yes.
It was precious a few hours before, and the moment has passed, and it's like a rebirthing, like of a phoenix, like rebirthing cycle, right? Like a transformation. Yeah. I've rushed twice, and there's just something magical about, I could never watch JUNKANOO. The only times I've experienced it or like doing it. And it's very, what I imagine someone going on some deep ayahuasca journey or something might be like, you know, like it's such a crazy experience where you feel so present in the moment of what you're doing with a collective. It's a rush, yeah. And it's just so powerful. And so all of this is like, you know, so all that energy of this work of the year kind of culminates in this moment, and then the objects are discarded. And that element of the discarding is one of the components that I find the most beautiful about the whole process. You know, that kind of, you know, talking about the tower or the 10 of swords, or like these cards where you're like getting to an end or a point that change has to occur. It's that moment. I think it's just beautiful. Like, you know, watching, like seeing a video of costumes going up in flames, or just like cars like running into them or whatever.
Right. And they're covered with what looks like little gemstones. And I'll put some pictures up so people can see, but the level of intricacy and craftsmanship that is put into the costumes, with the sequins, like individually painted on. And we're not talking about a couple, we're talking about like 9-foot statues, and yeah, and a year's worth of work. It's a mandala, and then it gets burned.
Yeah. And you know, I saw this image too of like the historic city of Nassau, like where they do JUNKANOO on Bay Street. It's really Bay Street's significance today. because Nassau as a city has shifted and changed so much where the epicenter of activity is no longer in the historic downtown, except JUNKANOO happens there. Like it becomes the scene of this event. And I think of like, if anyone's had an experience of putting glitter on and what their bedroom looks like after trying to clean it up, just imagine that across a city. You know, it's just like glitter and jewels and all that stuff is just everywhere. And it takes a moment to clean up. But that's the kind of like, I wanted to use the word wreckage, but it's has negative connotations, but it is kind of like a wreckage.
That's such appropriate language to use though, because the Bahamas was built on wreckage.
I know.
And also,
that's where it came from.
I mean, we all know there's so much that I love about the Bahamas and about Bahamian culture, but one of the greatest lessons that I learned was about letting go, because I feel like Bahamians are culturally can let shit go in a way that, I mean, I'm not personally used to. But do you think the part of it has to do with living in a hurricane zone? I mean, to me, when I think in my head about why is no one like, oh, we have to save this. I mean, again, could write a book. I mean, am writing a book partially on this topic. There's so many different things that could go into it, but the culmination of the history of the Bahamas, the history of Bahamian people, its location, its geography, nothing has ever been precious. Don't get to keep anything.
Yeah, like that's the beautiful part, you know, the letting go. Yeah. But that comes out of survival.
It's beautiful, but the history of why it is not beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And so I want to hold on to like those lessons of letting go, where the material can't even compete to the experience. But like you mentioned, which I love, like it's the sport. And that part I don't care for. The kind of fighting.
If you have not lived there and seen the thing, you cannot understand how serious the competition really is. Like I have definitely seen some people get into some fights at some bars about who's better.
For sure. And that, you know, that's how it's remembered. The desire for the validation of like winning is something that I don't like, right? And that's a part of the legacy of like validation, I think. Then it kind of makes it murky, the whole like letting go and kind of having the moment. And so it's kind of like, what do I hold? What do I bring with me? Yeah. What do I recognize as also a part of a long legacy of colonialism and slavery, and now post-colonial kind of, the trauma is still very alive and they're still being acted out. And when I moved, like I was just so fed up with the realities of the conditions, right? That, you know, like today, COVID is wreaking havoc on the economy, as well as Bahamians are a very susceptible population to be devastated by an illness like this. After having been hit by Dorian, after the power company is going through chaos, so that there's so much fear and you can't hold on because it's not even yours. Like, you know, I mentioned stability being like such a thing for me. I wouldn't have been able to achieve that, what I consider like really new and exciting for me, that stability, I think, if I was there. That's my reality. That's not everyone's reality. But I had to remove myself and figure out how to like learn the lessons that it provided me and the experience provided me, while crying apart, that I didn't have to be reactive to all the negatives. So much of my identity in the first like 7 or 8 years of me living in New York was reactive to home. I still thought of Nassau as home, and it's where I came from, but like home for me is completely shifted. And that's why I look at it like it's where I'm from. I love it, but it's a historic kind of home, you know? It doesn't function for me in the way that what I need is a home today. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no hierarchy in that. It's just where I'm at this moment. It's such a complicated push, pull, picking what you like, you know, what I need to survive and make a better me, and leaving other things behind. And what I'm realizing through that journey is that the more involved I am with it, the worse it turns out. I'm coming to realize slowly that the less I do regarding constructing my identity or constructing what I think I should be, the more my true self emerges. Because I for the longest time, I didn't even know who I was, like in really basic terms, because I was so preoccupied with the naming, right? Like, what am I presenting? What am I feeling to myself? How do I define this? How do I define that? That I was completely unable to just say like, oh, you know, the universe made me in this particular way, and I'm ignoring that. I'm kind of like ignoring the beauty of myself for like what the world has taught me and imposed upon me as the ways I should be. The way I view it in the most simple terms is it's taken me a lot of work to realize that I take up space as I am. And I do think I think it's a human experience to find one's place. I mean, we've talked a lot about the Bahamas together, and what is that version? You said you'd like see a version of there's a version of yourself in Nassau that you really liked, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Can you articulate what that is? And are there any like places that manifestation like came from? You know what I mean? Like,
Places in particular or culturally? Or when you say place, how would you define that?
I mean, in a broad sense, in an action, in a practice, in a way people are. It could be a geographic place, but I'm thinking more broadly, I guess. Where were the impacts? Where were those like origin stories? You know, what are those origin stories, if there are any?
Living in the Bahamas forced me to learn how to live in relationship with other people, which, I mean, reflects what you were talking about earlier in terms of your struggle when you moved to the US. Because when you live on an island that's 21 miles by 7 miles and the boundary is water, there's nowhere to go unless you get on a boat or a plane. You are going to see the people you don't want to see. You know, I grew up in places where you could just drive somewhere, you could drive to a different state. You know, you are unlikely to see people, and also partially because of the geography and partially because of the culture and the society, there's a lot more people interacting from different kinds of backgrounds than would be typical in the US, certainly where I'm from. And so you just have to learn how to get along. You learn how to get along, you learn how to interact in different kinds of ways, learn how to care differently. So that was a big lesson for me. Another big lesson for me was living in the Bahamas forced me to find my own feminine energy and my femininity more than I ever had before, because, you know, I mostly grew up, I went to all-girls school, an all-girls school that was extremely competitive, all the energy was very masculine. One of the best schools in sports in the country, lots of athletes, engineers, mathematicians, you know, all of these kinds of, and very competitive. And it's like women can do everything, right? It's about feminism, but not the feminine, right? We didn't really learn that much about being feminine because we are here to beat men. I'm a woman, I can do anything that a man can do. And I can do things that a man can't do, right? It's that kind of energy. And that doesn't really fit into Bahamian culture.
Understatement of the year.
And so I had to learn how to communicate in a different kind of way. I mean, a lot of it was adaptation, and it's not that I realized I was doing these things, but after a while, when I looked at myself and I felt into myself and I realized that I was becoming a very different person than who I had been. And I remember, you know, at some point I had a couple of Bahamian friends who were like, you don't only talk like a Bahamian, but you walk like a Bahamian. You have the energy. And in a lot of ways I had to, particularly given the kinds of spaces that I was in, communities where I was living, especially as a white American female. You know, I had to find some kind of way of adapting and fitting in. And so in the process of adapting, of having to slow down, of having to kind of, you know, become a little bit more watery, become a little bit more feminine, but still be allowed to be bold, to be allowed to be feminine and be bold at the same time was not something that was really part of what was acceptable in any of the places that I had lived before then. And so being forced to incorporate a lot more of my feminine energy just to be able to communicate with people, you know, whether it was men or women in Bahamian society. You know, I had to change a lot. And I think in this last year, living in San Diego, it's a military centric place, and it's a lot of like that kind of energy, you know, or like my family's from New England. If you're in New England, like kind of energy, I'm really realizing like I don't feel like I can embody my feminine in that same kind of way. So I think the biggest thing is that I invited a lot more feminine energy in. I think that's really important. I learned how to talk about things that were important to me in different kinds of ways. I rediscovered my poetic self, right? I had written a lot of poetry when I was younger, and then that became not important. And then it became the only way that I could really communicate with a lot of the people who I was interacting with. No one really wants to hear about, you know, interrogating your identity and colonialism. But if I can express that thing in a visceral, sexy, kind of flowy, you know, way, then people want to listen and people can understand it too. I mean, certainly Pop-Up is such a special place and played such a critical part in my life and in who I am and in my Bahamian experience and Bahamian story. Yeah, re-embracing my creativity. I kind of grew up in this cultural, social context in which, you know, you got one job, you have a career, and your career is a job, and you can be this or you can be this. You can't be multiple things. And I remember, you know, maybe the first or second week after I moved, I went to go see a reading with Marian Bethel. She had just released her second book of poetry. And I was like, oh my God, here's a woman who is writing this amazing poetry. She's got these poetry books, and also she's an attorney, right? And she's incredibly intelligent. And she also has this different way of talking and moving. Like when I think of being an attorney, even if you're a woman, but in American society, so much is like, you can be this or you can be this. If you want to be powerful, like you can be powerful and feminine, or you can be intelligent and masculine. There's these different kinds of powers, but it's like, you can't be sexy and smart. You can only be one or the other. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that emerged for me towards the end of my time there is I really felt like I was starting to integrate. It's possible, it's okay, it's acceptable to be flowy and feminine and sexy and bold and smart. You know, you can be poetic and you can be intelligent. Everything is not black or white. I mean, that was the core of my dissertation. It's the core of all of my theoretical work. And if there was one significant thing that I received from Bahamian culture and Bahamian society, it's integration, inner integration, really learning what that looks like. And then I've continued, that's the reason why I got into astrology. Astrology is a system that organizes that process, that shows how that process can look like in an organized kind of way. To own all of who you are. You're allowed to own all of who you are. You don't have to be this thing or this thing. You can be a poet, you can be an attorney, you could be a doctor and an artist. And the beauty of being in a small place is that, you know, you go to an art exhibition at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, and it's possible that somebody has an exhibition and that's not their only career. I mean, for a lot of people it is. Of the artists who we know who are extremely talented artists, produce a whole lot of art and also are teaching at Now University of the Bahamas. It's a paradox because I don't necessarily know that the first word that I would use to describe Bahamian life or culture is productivity, but to a certain extent, Bahamians can be extremely productive. And to a certain extent, I know that I was so much more productive, generally speaking, living in Nassau than I have been living here in the United States. And I think that part of that is because there isn't the pressure for productivity. I can settle into the space where I need in order to produce something, not be like, have you gotten it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Because so much of what I do, I mean, even in my academic work, like I kind of have to settle in. don't do well when I'm under that kind of pressure. I can't produce things in this kind of Americanized. I love being productive, but I hate when people ask if I've been productive. Look. Part of it's because I put so much pressure on myself to be productive to begin with. That was another gift of Bahamian society is, for me, it was a place where I learned that my value does not lie in what I produce. You know, it's a place where I felt I was valued for who I was. I was valued for being unique. And I was unique. And I am unique. That was valued as opposed to, well, what have you done? What have you produced? What have you put out? And then I think the last thing is I'm a pretty friendly person. I like talking to people. I don't really feel like Americans, at least where I've lived, are very friendly. They are in some places. It's definitely geographic and regional. But in Nassau, you have to say hi to everyone. You must. And again, from an adaptation standpoint, if I did not say hello to everyone, then I was definitely a tourist. But if I said hi to people, then I was definitely Bahamian. That's one of those cutoff points when you're white.
Thank you for all the things you said, because it definitely brought up some things for me, but that just cracked me up because I haven't been home in a few years. And the last time I went, my mom picked me up from the airport and I had to go to road traffic, which is like the DMV, to get my license renewed. Anyway, so I go from the airport with my bag to road traffic, and there's like a line of people waiting outside, that I have to get on the line.
Been there.
And I walk in and everyone like turns around and looks at me. Afternoon. Like everyone, everyone had to like say good afternoon and I had to respond back. Like,
oh yeah.
It's that kind of like, you might as well have just killed their firstborn. But it just brought back a positive memory of connectivity. Thank you. Because, I mentioned I was sober. I do 12-step. I go to meetings pretty regularly, very regularly every day. You get a group of alcoholics and addicts together, you're going to have drama. It's just like, what it is. People are people. But I intentionally went to meetings nearby me because I wanted the feeling of like, I wanted to know people who had lived around me. And my sponsor would say like, why don't you like try these other meetings? Like these people are kind of strange and these like, give service and everything, but you don't have to be best friends with them. I think from his perspective, I took it upon myself. I really see this more as a Bahamian teaching, is I felt like even the people I didn't get along with, the people who really annoyed me, like beyond, I still call, I still show up for, because they're in my community. And my community is never going to look like the way I think it should look. It's never going to be all the same types together. And you just have to figure out a way to make it work with the diversity that you have. And it usually ends up working so much better, where people are putting pressure on one another to be something else in those ways. But that's something I definitely feel like I learned from growing up in that context. You can't avoid people, you just got to deal with it and figure out how to move forward, no matter how you're feeling. And that really resonated with me, and something I'm constantly grateful for, because it's just given me so much access to accepting others and not feeling the need to allow my own fears and anger and resentment to dictate my life, because I could keep running, right? Be like, oh, well, I'm not going to go to that place again, or I'm not going to do this again. And you could keep doing that, but where is that going to end up? It like really forces you to be direct in situations. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate it's making me think fondly hearing it from you on the social ways that people interact and how you are able to be yourself. Like I was definitely like felt different, but there are many ways I felt like I belonged. It was that same difficulty.
In what ways do you feel like you belong?
Because I feel like there was roles to be played. Like I felt like I had a place in it. Yeah. Like anything was possible. Like that's something that I miss. That's something I really, when you say like, as you were talking, like if I think about something I missed and I had to like mourn, was that anything is possible.
That is so true. And it makes things not boring. This is another thing that I love so much in the Bahamas, well, especially in Nassau, the craziest shit can happen, and everyone just turn around and respond exactly how they responded to a road traffic. Like, of course that just happened. No one's surprised. The shit could be on fire and everyone will be out there watching it, but it's like, anything can happen. Whatever stories Americans have heard about crazy shit that happens in the Bahamas cannot even begin. I feel like I can't even begin to compare to the reality.
And it's powerful because you have such a different relationship to life and moving through it and what your place in it is. And so if I see that constructs can be broken and changed and manipulated, that affects one. And I felt that I could absorb that energy and harness it in a way that allowed my personal experience to be flexible, where you said like I love the story with Marion and like these kind of like wearing different hats and being like artists who like also have professions and they have hobbies and there's a lot of stuff going on, that kind of quality where one day I could be this thing and another day it could be a whole other thing in really close proximity to one another, where they can integrate in a way that makes there's such a burden. There is work culture, and living in New York in particular, which is like the epicenter of like capitalist America, capitalist global world. I come into combat with this a lot, and it's something that I've really resisted. I am someone who takes lunch breaks. Like my partner would be like, oh, I was seeing my dad's working like 10 hours and whatever. And I was like, well, did you go outside for a walk? And he was like, no, I got work to do. And I'd be like, girl, you need to like go outside for a walk and have your lunch because, it might not appear to be the most productive, but it's more holistic. You're going to get the space you need, the sun you need, the food, the nourishment that you need to be productive, not in a hustle, got to get it done way. And I definitely think that things move at their own pace in Nassau and in the Bahamas, in the region generally. And that can be challenging, but there's a lot of lessons in that. And things can happen super quickly too.
Yeah, I think a lot of people focus on the island time thing where everything's slow. But my experience is more that it's just sitting in a different place on the time-space continuum, or almost that it sits outside of the time-space continuum, because you can be in Nassau and then like a month later, it feels like you've only been there for a day. Time and space are fluid there. It's a portal. I mean, it's a deeply powerful place spiritually.
Yeah, and you could be who you want to be. I think about this even with activists who are there now. Being the black sheep serves a purpose. And I think that though you will be ostracized to some extent, I think there's a collective conscience that knows that the role is important to be filled. And so though I never felt like I fully belonged in my person, as a part of a social narrative, I felt like I belonged. I felt like I had a place within the society to push it in certain ways that I knew mattered. And I knew that other people knew it mattered. Though, like you mentioned with the colonial thing, like the words and the vocabulary around it might not be as direct. It's more lived, more felt. And that's like a really powerful way to exist. That you have a sense of like purpose within the community that you live. Like I definitely had to restructure what that looked like for me in moving to the US. And like typical kind of like America, it's like my life in some ways have gotten smaller. I've had to like contain it in a different way, where it's more about like what's coming in and going out. Like I have to kind of like almost monitor the cycle differently. Whereas there, it's kind of like coming at every direction at any time. What's the old telephones, like the operators, like the different like nozzles, like you could be doing a bazillion different types of computations at the same time. And that's really beautiful. Yeah, and time is just like such a, I told my partner this year, and it's the first time I ever said it, was I said, home is really green. And I meant that literally. Yeah. Because I don't like winter. I've never been a fan of winter. And in sobriety, I'm gaining an appreciation for all seasons and space and where I'm at. And spring is becoming a favorite season of mine. And like I just took for granted the vibrancy of life. I mean that from like the most literal kind of like, it's always sunny, it's always trees in bloom of some sort or growing, or always some pine bush over in the corner. Like it opens up, like you said, as a portal. Like, you know, living in a place like, which is kind of like the tropics in a more general way.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's a portal to another dimension, like the closer you get to the equator or something. And I really, I miss it. I miss it a lot. I'm grateful to have the break to like acknowledge it, but what that then, how that is absorbed into the identity of a person or people. Like the slowness, I think, is partially because though it's a place that's like economically going through a hard time, very dependent, you know, I mentioned like post-colonial issues and corruption and that kind of thing. There's almost no rush, I feel, because there's like an intuitive knowledge that there's just so much available. It's not like I got to compete for this little piece of something, you know, there's enough of good life to live if you find your way to navigate it.
I think the piece you'd said about feeling your place is so beautiful. And earlier I was taking a walk and I was thinking about, and I don't know why, but it didn't occur to me that this is a very Bahamian thing, how liberating it feels in my body to feel like I don't have to compete. I don't know if it ever occurred to me. Maybe it did. I don't know. I've only written like thousands of pages about on Bahamian life, but that is, I mean, that's a thing, you know, everyone kind of has their place and you don't have to compete. And I think part of it is because everyone is allowed to do so many things. And the other thing I was thinking about is, you know, you talked about the operator board for the phone. To a certain extent, just there's more space because things are moving more slowly. There's more time to do all of these different things because it doesn't have to get done by 4:00 this afternoon. It does feel like time bends. And in terms of thinking about the politics of everyday life, you know, just thinking about American life, what makes, you know, we got to get it done, and you can only do one thing. Well, you can only do one thing because you have to get it done in a certain period of time. And there's something about, I mean, that's the treadmill kind of metaphor, you know, that you can only do one thing because you got to get it done right now. But if you had time to get things done, then you could do lots of different things. And it sounds very simple when I'm talking about it, but it's not really that simple in reality. It feels different viscerally, you know, in an embodied way. The other thing I was thinking about when you're talking about, you know, the closer you get to the equator, the more kind of the way time changes. It's interesting for me to think about that. If you think about the North and South Pole as polarities, and the further that you get away from any one or the other polarities, the more things can kind of come together magnetically.
I like that a lot. It's so funny how I'm now coming back around to absorbing the lessons of growing up in a place like that, where like this relationship to like productivity being one thing, and how for me it's not sustainable, you know, and to be personal, that's what got me where I ended up with regards to my addiction. I was a binge user and I would work hard, play hard, do this thing as hard as you can do it, and then switch to something else and do that as hard as you can do it, and switch this and do that as hard as you can do it. And that doesn't produce a person who's satisfied with life. And I'm not saying that this is why I'm an addict, like, you know, but this is the fuel that keeps it building. And it's just like, I need to escape. I need to do something else. I need to, you know, it's all this not feeling spiritually fulfilled, and spiritual in the kind of sense of like living life.
Right. Your spirit does not.
Exactly. And in my sobriety, my journey has been so much about pausing, like, you know, and being like, maybe I don't have to meet that 4:00 deadline today. If it needs to happen, it needs to happen. But I'm like, does it need to happen? What toll is this taking on me? Does this align with the things I should be doing, that my values, you know, instead of the value of the other that I'm attempting to please? Am I people pleasing right now to get some other kind of ego trip? What's my motives here at all? And it just forced me to question all of these things I thought that I wanted when I was leaving the Bahamas and moving to New York, to discover that it's much more complicated and there's got to be place and time for everything. That's how stability is achieved. I spent a lot of time making work my higher power. It's been the authority over my life. And then what happens when I lose the job, which has happened, and then I'm depressed for however long, and I lose that self-esteem and that will, because my identity is based upon what I do, which is something you said earlier, instead of just being who I am. I think having the privilege of being able to live and grow up there and live in such a different space like New York has given me a lot of perspective. And I'm now able to kind of use both of those experiences to construct a life that is what I want, like on my terms. And, this is new. This is new. Very similar to what you were kind of saying earlier, letting go of that old stuff, or that stuff that's not working, the stuff that is holding you back, and just looking at like what works and welcoming it all in, and however it's able to be welcomed in. I'm doing the same job I did 3 years ago. I'm living in the same block I said for the past 9 years. My externals all look very similar, but my internal life is transformed. And there's just so much work and so many layers of the onion to like unpeel. That's where the majority of my work is going. And so whether it's my program, whether it's the baking I do, or my job, or my friendships, or my relationship, or my finances, it's all about, for me, just feeling like it's connected and like an air of possibility is in it. Like I'm almost in a way recreating this sense that we're talking about what's available in NASA, this kind of space for it all to function harmoniously.
What is your vision for the world moving forward?
I don't spend much time thinking about that, nor do I want to, nor do I think I need to. I'm very think global, work local, or whatever. And what my journey over the past couple of years has taught me is that I have zero control over anything outside of my own actions, not even my thoughts. I don't have control over them. They come up, but I have control over how that thought manifests into an action and what I can do to transform my experience and by extension, the experience of others around me. And so the way that I've been moving forward is, again, bringing up stability. And stability isn't some achievement that I get stable and then I'm stable. You know what I mean? It's an ever
it's a daily practice.
It's always evolving. And some days I'll feel it and some days I won't. But it's an aspirational goal that I think when one aspires to it, they can live in a state of contentment in relation to it. And if I can do that, then I'm able to be of service to someone else, because I apologize for this image, but it's like a bank account in a way. I can't get overdrawn. That has become my goal, is that if I get overdrawn, if I give something that wasn't freely mine to give, then I'm not giving something. That's in my nature, to then expect something in return, which I'm not going to get. And I'm going to be pissed, I'm going to be annoyed. And in the long run, this is going to lead to me creating conflict within myself and within the world around me. And so the most productive thing I can possibly do to participate within a global conversation is to ensure that I'm taking care of myself the best of my ability, and any little bit of extra I have, which I have a lot. There's no shortage of extra that I can give, that I'm giving it, whether that's working with individuals to just show up for friends, whether that's participating in movements I see as valuable in a kind of local space, or giving literally, if I can, to any kind of cause, but just being of service, showing up for family, showing up for friends, showing up.
I'll say you are really, really good at showing up, better than most people. I feel like that's a gift that you have.
Well, thank you. I've not always felt that way.
You may not have, and you may not have even always been that way, but for me anyway, in my life, I have felt that as a gift from you.
I appreciate that. And so for the world, I think everything's a trickle. I've been rethinking going back to school. I've played with the subject of geography for a long time. It was a subject I loved in high school. it was something that I did as a mini concentration in my undergrad. I love maps and I wanted to become GIS certified. And I always thought it was a part of my creative destiny. And it was always present, even in the way that I work with crystals and learn about them in my ritual practices. It's something that I get excited about, populations as well as geology. But a big part of like why I think I have such a warm, fuzzy feelings around it and why I've been able to learn as much as I have is because the teacher that showed up for me the most in high school was my geography teacher. And she didn't do anything beyond what her job was. She did her job well. And she showed up when she said she was going to show up. She laid out the rules. She was kind. She didn't go some extreme out of her way to work for me. She just did what she said she was going to do. She did it well. She did it in love and in kindness. And that made a huge impact upon me. And that's just like an anecdote to, I think, why I'm saying like self-care, I think is like the ultimate care. It's always like keeping the checks and balances, like that bank account I kind of mentioned that I don't love talking in those terms. But, whenever I have that little bit of extra, I can give it. And what helps me know that I have that little bit of extra is, again, like a kind of spiritual practice, whether that's pulling a tarot card and seeing what comes up and meditating on that and listening and just being like, it comes to me. My instincts tell me the way to go. And if one person can be of service to another that leads to one, to another, to another, to another, it's transformative. And it's real transformation because it's coming from the person, not being told. I'm very skeptical of like teaching. You can't teach experience to someone. And so that's the best way I can participate at this moment. But I hope that will evolve. I really hope that COVID I'm sure it will bring positives and negatives for the future. I want to choose to focus on the more positive transformations that can happen. There's a rebirth that is taking place. And in that way, it's very exciting. I mean, that's not to like underestimate the death and the trauma, but it could be so much worse. Globally in politics, I don't find myself overly concerned about it because things always come around. And instead of like fighting something that like being mad that people aren't wearing masks or that Trump's the president or whatever it is, like instead of using that energy and burning it up, be like, okay, that's today, like what can I do to build tomorrow? That sounds so corny and so like Miss Universe, but I'm into it. I'm just grateful that you asked me to speak and be here with you. I'm really honored. It makes me feel seen and valued, and I appreciate you so much. And you really, I think, helped me in ways you didn't even know how. You're so much a part of even my journey to sobriety and witnessing you connect with yourself. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm grateful that you're doing this and that you're keeping a space for dialogue and that you're writing. And I'm just living in a lot of gratitude at the moment. So just thank you so much.
I appreciate that I received that. Thank you. I feel very similarly that you have, for me, been such an important part of my journey. I feel like there's stuff that I can talk to you about that I can't talk to anybody else about because there are certain tensions, some of which we've discussed today. You can't talk to someone about it unless they have also had that experience. And I have been so grateful to you over the past few years as I've been negotiating my identity and negotiating my decisions about where I'm going to be and how I want to express myself and all of this other, whatever these things are. You've always been there. There are things that you get. One of the things that you talked about earlier that I thought was really beautiful, that really resonated with me, is Bahamian communication. All of the ways that Bahamians communicate that don't use words, that don't involve words, and how complex communication really is, and kind of the energetic forms of communication, body language, all of these different things. Sometimes I feel like I'm communicating with you and I don't have to say anything. I'm really happy that you're in the place that you're in.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I'll see you soon.
All right. I love you. Bye-bye.
I love you too.